Welcome guys, this is my previews and predictions for episode 6 of Battlebots. How did you guys like episode 5? Wasn't that a fun one to talk about? In all seriousness, Hydra vs. Huge aside, I think it was actually a pretty good episode. Kraken really proved itself. I thoroughly enjoyed their performance against Witch Doctor. We had Fusion tearing up Aegis, that was a whole heap of fun. Jackpot surprised me against Ghost Raptor, showing that it is more durable than a veteran team. Claw Viper was a little bit disappointing to me, but I guess a new robot's not always going to be particularly durable. Big Deal, I thought, put up a pretty good performance against Lockjaw. I really enjoyed that. And Sub-Zero kept its top 32 hopes alive. We had a couple of robots, Huge and Witch Doctor, slipping to 0 and 2, making their next fights absolutely crucial. And speaking of important fights, we have a few for you this episode, so stick around and we can get into the nuts and bolts of it all. So first fight up, we have two robots that have been on the bubble, so to speak, quite a lot throughout their careers. Victor Soto and Rotator will be taking on Leanne Cushing and Valkyrie. Now don't let the 0-1 start fool you. Rotator looked very good in their fight against Beta. Of course, it was a controversial decision, a split decision as well, and a situation no builder wants to find themselves in.
Sorry judges, I think you got it wrong.
Victor executed his strategy the only way he could and found himself coming up short, but you can always expect a veteran like Victor to bounce back. Valkyrie, on the other hand, had a fight I think they would rather forget. Tantrum came into that fight complete underdogs and really took it up to Leanne Cushing and team, and was very unfortunate to break down. Valkyrie escaped that one by the skin of their teeth because it was not looking good. And here in this fight, Valkyrie comes up against a similarly durable robot. Rotator has that in common with Tantrum, it is built like a brick, so Valkyrie might face similar difficulties against Victor Soto's robot here. In terms of similar fights in the past, I don't think we really have that much to go on. This is an undercutter versus undercutter fight if Victor Soto decides to do that, and I think he will. I think these days he can trust the durability of Rotator's weapon. It's not like Season 3 Rotator where the weapons were working sporadically. This is a much evolved version of the robot, battle tested and battle hardened. I don't know if the same can quite be said for Valkyrie. It definitely is a much improved evolution of what we saw back in Season 3. However, that weapon still has a habit of malfunctioning.
Something must have hit the motor or something.
For this undercutter mirror match, I expect Valkyrie to go with their new three-toothed weapon, Glory. That weapon was designed specifically for reach, and against another horizontal spinner, that reach affords them more chance of doing damage to the important parts of their opponent's weapon. For Rotator going against other horizontal spinners, we've seen Victor Soto go with the plow configuration and the spinning weapon at the top, at the back of the robot, and we saw this in their famous fights against Tombstone and Icewave, with a disc against Icewave. However, I don't think that's what we'll see here. As I said before, I think Victor Soto will trust the durability of his robot to go weapon to weapon against Valkyrie, even if he is giving up reach. And as much as I've enjoyed watching Valkyrie improve over the past couple of seasons, if that fight against Tantrum is anything to go by, I think that improvement might have stalled a little bit. Hopefully the fight against Tantrum was just an anomaly. However, we know that Rotator is durable. We also know it's a very fast robot, and we know that Valkyrie does struggle against robots that can outmaneuver it. I'm gonna have to say I'm going for Rotator on this one, and that will bring both robots to 1-1, which really highlights just how lucky Valkyrie was when Tantrum broke down. An 0-2 start would be devastating for this team, but at 1-1 and one more fight to play, top 32 is definitely within reach for them, especially a veteran team that has proved themselves in the past. Rotator at 1-1, however, looks very strong, I think. This is a fight that won't be taken lightly by the selection committee, no matter who wins it, and with such a close loss against Beta in its last fight, I reckon Rotator might have a place in the top 32, just about sewn up. However, with a win here, Valkyrie can really boost its stocks. I think a victory against Rotator would show the Battlebots world that Valkyrie has indeed arrived. It will be a finalist this season, and Rotator will be really struggling to put together a case unless it can find a real veteran team that it can beat in its next fight. But I don't think that's going to have to be the case. I'm going to say Rotator, and I think it's going to be by knockout. Gee, they're really throwing Extinguisher to the wolves this season, aren't they? This is battle number 2. It's John Flack and Extinguisher against John Maladnik and Gigabyte. This is quite an interesting matchup to be made here. I can't quite figure out why exactly it exists, unless it's some lame joke about Extinguisher putting out the flames on Gigabyte's paint job. I don't know, but it's the second horizontal spinner that they've given Extinguisher this season, and well, the last one knocked it out in one hit. And Perfect Phoenix was a robot that had some untested improvements after being out of the sport for quite a few years. Although having said that, Gigabyte didn't have a particularly great first fight either. It fought against Copperhead and they absolutely copped it. This is the second time we've seen Gigabyte lose their head, and it's definitely not a pretty sight, unless you're Zach Goff.
Oh, that's dark.
I feel dark.
Gigabyte obviously have a lot of experience. They've been smashing robots for quite a while. Extinguisher, on the other hand, this is their second season, and they've no doubt learnt a lot of lessons in the past couple of years, but the robot is still most definitely unproven. However, for this year, they've brought a new configuration, and it's a vertical spinner, and it's one that makes them look essentially like Red Witch Doctor. We haven't seen this configuration yet from Extinguisher, but this is the perfect opportunity for them to try it out. And I say that because real Witch Doctor completely destroyed Gigabyte in a fight last season. Not as much as Copperhead did, let's be honest, but it was a most comprehensive victory, and it's one that showed that Gigabyte does indeed have a weakness against vertical spinners. So as long as they have the option, I don't think there's any question that John Flack and team will use that configuration. However, it's obviously untested. Who knows how reliable it's going to be. I mean, it looks vicious from this test box video, don't get me wrong, it can get up to some pretty serious speeds by the look of things. However, power is one thing, durability is another, and in a 3-minute fight, durability is almost more important, since often one hit isn't necessarily going to do all that much, especially against a robot like Gigabyte that is often quite stable when it's already spinning up to speed. It would be absolutely mad if Extinguisher could pull off an upset here. After all, there's nothing like a good chunky wedge and a vertical spinner at the front to completely confound Gigabyte or Megabyte or just full body spinners in general. However, while looking at this weapon to weapon, it is a bad matchup for Gigabyte. It has to be said that the difference in experience in these teams, the difference in quality of the machines themselves is probably insurmountable for Extinguisher. However, it is pretty cool that they actually get a chance to knock off a robot like Gigabyte. I'm going to have to say Gigabyte by knockout. This will put them at 1-1. It will stabilize their chances for a top 32 berth, and it's really all going to come down to their next fight. Whether or not Gigabyte will have to hope for some amnesty from the selection committee when comparing it with a bunch of other 1 and 2 robots. A loss here will see Extinguisher, however, on 0 and 2, and I don't see any way back for it from that sort of a record. A win will still keep things up in the air, though. Okay, so we move on to another fight with both robots coming into this at 0-1. This is Sharko versus Slapbox. Slapbox is a robot that I didn't get a chance to go over the history of since I didn't cover episode 4. So just quickly, this is a fairly new robot. We saw them in Robot Ruckus 2019 at the Orlando Maker Fair. They took it up to some veteran robots there and looked pretty good. I honestly like the look of this robot. It's well driven, it's fast, it has quite some power to it, and it reminds me of Gage Gauchois' Gladiator from Battlebots in the classic era. So I was looking forward to seeing what it could do. It has a number of configurations other than its main one that it can use, and one of them is a plow, which it had to use against Tombstone in its first fight. I mean, talk about throwing a robot to the wolves. It got completely shredded by Tombstone, as you'd expect for a new robot, lost its wedges, lost its wheels, it was all over the place. But while the robot let the team down in terms of its durability, the driving was pretty on point. Bryce Youngkoskis put the robot exactly where it needed to be, and while the robot fell apart under pressure, he did not. Let's look at Sharko real quick. Ed Robinson's first fight this season was against Smeeee, a fight that neither robot matched up that well against one another. Here, however, Sharko definitely has the opportunity to get a good bite in or a good flip in, depending on what the priorities are. Slapbox does look like it is a good shape to clamp down on and try and take control of the fight. However, the problem is if it does get a clamp, Sharko might be driven around the arena by a Slapbox if it's not careful. Slapbox is a very powerful robot. It seems to have very good traction. It's obviously very well driven. Sharko, on the other hand, it has those big wheels, but it's only two-wheel driven and sometimes lacks the control needed for the precision driving that would pay off against a robot like Slapbox. I think Slapbox will go the standard configuration with the spiked slap wedge thing at the front. This fight is ultimately going to be about power, about control, about driving. There's no big weapons here that are going to cause huge amounts of damage. Maybe Sharko can get in and rip a tire off with its jaws. It's going to take some amazing driving to actually be able to do that. I'm not sure if I quite think that that is possible, unfortunately for Sharko. I also think that that would be its main route to victory, especially if it can score some damage points. If this comes down to a judge's decision, that would be a great boon. I don't know if that's going to happen. I think Slapbox will control this fight. It's got the power, it's got the driving skills behind it, it's got the weapon to do it as well. I reckon we're going to see Slapbox 1-1. I think it's going to be a judge's decision. I don't think either of these robots are going to break down. I think Sharko seems quite reliable. Slapbox does too. So it'll be an 0-2 Sharko. That's going to be a real shame. It would have been nice to see them in the top 32. I'm not sure if they can get in at 1-2 if they do happen to win their next fight. Slapbox will be 1-1 with a loss against Tombstone, so their road to the top 32 is still quite clear, I'd say. Another win would see them there, I reckon, and even a loss against a really good robot might see them hit the top 32, supposing that they do indeed win this one against Sharko. Here we have battle number 4, and it's two robots that seem to have been on a collision course throughout this whole season. Both Malice and Mad Catter burst onto the scene in the first episode of this season, and followed up those impressive performances by going 2-0 in their next fight. This fight will determine the first robot we see going 3-0, and also perhaps the first robot guaranteed to get, say, a top 10 seeding in the round of 32. Thus far, I think I've been more impressed by Mad Catter. They have taken wins against Fusion and Ribot, and both of those wins I think were quite convincing. Malice, in the meantime, they took a win against Axe Backwards, which was very convincing, but perhaps against a lower tier robot, and then against Shatter, where it just scraped out a judge's decision in a fight that Shatter dictated the strategy. We've not yet seen Malice come up against a vertical spinner. Mad Catter has of course fought a horizontal spinner already in this competition in Fusion. Of course, half of that robot was also a vertical spinner, but we saw Mad Catter's wedge stand up pretty well to that very dangerous weapon at the back of Fusion. It took a little bit of damage when it was off guard, but for the most part it was able to deflect that weapon. Martin Mason also has history against horizontal spinners, not just with Mad Catter, but also with Cat King in King of Bots 2, where they briefly fought against the South Korean robot Orbi Blade, one of the most dangerous weapons at the competition in China. So we've got a couple of examples of Mad Catter taking on horizontal spinners, and it's gone quite well. That wedge at the front has served it well in the past. I can only think that that is the setup they'll be going into this fight against Malice with. Malice, of course, is a little bit of a different weapon. It's a horizontal spinning drum rather than the tri-bar spinner on Fusion or the bar on Orbi Blade. So it'll be interesting to see if the much more compact design of the weapon of Malice makes any difference here. Looking at Malice, I'm interested to see how durable that weapon is going to be. Obviously, it had an axe stuck in it in the fight against Shatter. That would never help, but that was a specific plan on the part of Adam Wrigley. But yeah, it's yet to be seen whether or not Malice's weapon will survive a 3-minute long fight against another highly damaging weapon. Having said that, Mad Catter's fights haven't been 100% convincing either. Fight against Fusion, it obviously took a lot of damage, and the weapon went down as well. While against Ribot, Mad Catter was losing the head-to-head contest right up until Ribot made a driving mistake, and Mad Catter was able to take advantage with a hit that disabled the WPI team's weapon. I think the decisive factor in this fight will be the wedge on the front of Mad Catter. It has proven that it can go up against horizontal spinners in the past and show a great amount of durability against them, while also allowing that weapon to deal the damage that it needs. We haven't seen the durability of the actual body of Malice being tested just yet, so I'm interested to see what Mad Catter can do to it. However, I have to go with the robot that I've just been more impressed with this season, and also in the past against weapons of this type, and that is Mad Catter. And I think this is going to be by knockout. This would see Mad Catter on 3-0. It would probably see it get a top 10 seeding, I'd say at least. Malice would fall to 2-1, with wins against Axe Backwards and Shatter. Not bad robots at all. Shatter definitely a robot we're probably seeing in the top 32, but it wasn't such a convincing win there. I think we can see Malice seeded, around 14th to 18th, something in that range, middle of the road, if they fall to 2-1 here. So here we have, in fact, our third battle of the night between two robots who are currently on 0-1. This one is between Atom94 and Tantrum. Atom94, the Indian-Canadian newcomers this season, tutored by Ray Billings, are coming off of a loss against the Big Dill, who is a new team but made up of veterans. The power of Atom94's weapon is evident. However, against a driver that just did not let them get any purchase at all, Atom really struggled out there. Tantrum, in the meantime, had a much different experience. It was most definitely worried by Valkyrie's weapon early in the piece, but this is a very tough little robot as discussed previously in this video, and Valkyrie's weapon ended up giving out. Tantrum then assumed full control of the match, but ended up breaking down, which was shockingly unlucky for Aaron Hill and his team, since it looked like that, if it went to the judge's decision, would have ended up in Tantrum's favor.
What a heartbreak.
They now look to redeem themselves against Atom94, and if we look back in their past, across all their 2 seasons of Battlebots and their 1 season of King of Bots, we can see that Tantrum has only fought 2 vertical spinners, Uppercut and Yeti. Let's focus on Yeti, a high quality robot that nevertheless took quite a while to knock out Tantrum, which is something that doesn't happen too often. Tantrum, I'd say, has a good shot here. In Atom94's last fight, they showed serious control issues straight from coming out of the square, where they proceeded to spin around in circles and weren't able to lay any blows on Big Dill. Tantrum is a well-controlled robot, I feel, and can make Atom94 pay for that lack of control if that's not been sorted out yet. Tantrum will be able to pick its shots, bring that punching spinner to bear, and try and find any faults or chinks in the armor that this newcomer might have. We can see that Atom94 is dangerous, so if it can land a couple of early shots, it could set itself up pretty well for the rest of the fight. However, Tantrum is durable. Sure, it lost drive against Valkyrie, but that really is the only time Tantrum has lost power of its own accord. I think it's safe to assume that that issue has been sorted out and probably won't resurface for this fight, so it's going to need to take a real pounding from Atom if it were to break. I don't know, I just don't see Atom taking control of a fight for long enough to land the amount of hits required to actually break Tantrum. I think Tantrum will be able to control the fight for longer and land more effective blows with that control. I'm going to go with Tantrum by knockout. I'm just not too sure about the durability of this new robot, Atom94. This would see Tantrum back up to 1-1, redeeming itself after its disappointing loss against Valkyrie. However, I don't think the selection committee will count that loss too much against it, since indeed it was a very good performance by Tantrum anyway. So this is quite exciting. Aaron Hill might actually see himself and Tantrum in the finals this season, and I don't think this is a robot that many people had on their radar, so it's really cool to see. Atom94, however, will slip to 0-2, and as a newcomer, I don't see a way for them to bounce back. At 1-2, a newcomer probably has very little hope of catching the eye of the selection committee, but a win against Tantrum might just turn things around for them. Here we have fight number 6, and it is between Paintrain and Smeeee. So Paintrain is another robot that debuted in episode 4, so I didn't quite get to cover it for one of these videos, so let's just quickly do that. There isn't really much to cover, to be honest. Paintrain is a completely new robot. Evan Arias has competed in beetle weights before, mainly with a robot called Shred It Bro, which has a similar weapon to Paintrain here, but is a bit of a different design. And of course, the show gave a pretty cool backstory about Evan Arias and where he had come from in his initial episode. After that, of course, he fought Slammo. He didn't do too well against Craig Danby's robot. The somewhat uncontrollable nature of the robot really gave Slammo the opportunity to dominate that fight. I kind of worry the control issues come down to a fundamental issue with the design of the robot, so I'm not sure if it's something that can be rectified between fights. But I really hope, for Evan Arias' sake, that can be sorted out in some way, shape, or form. The robot would pivot too much around the center of the body and rock back and forth on the wheels.
It's not getting very good stability to the floor right now.
So maybe the latter problem might be fixed by starting the robot upside down, perhaps? I'm not sure. But now we have Smeeee. Joe Fabiani has brought an awesome, new, unique design to the competition, but as described earlier in this video, its fight against Sharko was very awkward. However, Smeeee took the victory, and Joe Fabiani showed us that robot doesn't just work in theory, it also worked fairly practically, but perhaps up against the wrong opponent here. It's going to be interesting to see if Paintrain will provide a better target for those undercutting spinners at the sides. This fight, would you believe, is in fact a rematch. They have in fact fought one another in a beetleweight tournament, with Evan Arias driving his robot Shred It Bro up against the smaller version of Smeeee. Shred It Bro actually won that fight after taking a wheel off Smeeee. Oh, and look at what tactic Smeeee was trying to use. Isn't that a coincidence? Yeah, anyway, to this fight, I really don't think Paintrain's weapon has enough reach, and I'm really worried that it's not going to do much more than just scrape off the wedges of Smeeee like Sharko managed to do. If it was sticking out a little bit more, it might actually be able to get a bit of bite underneath Smeeee or catch an edge or something like that. I think Paintrain's best opportunity is to forget what I said before about starting the robot upside down and maybe just charge straight over the top of Smeeee and try and get it from behind. But that almost seems too unlikely. I think more likely is perhaps a repeat of Smeee's last fight against Sharko, maybe with a little bit more action from the undercutter spinners. We might see those tires getting damaged, further hampering the control of Paintrain and maybe knocking it out. I'm not too sure. I'm going to go with Smeeee in this one. I reckon it'll be a judge's decision though. I don't see much chance of either robot getting purchase on the other, but I do think that Smeeee will be able to control the fight, and that will put it in good stead to win the judge's decision, since that control will negate Paintrain's ability to do damage to it. This would put Paintrain at 0-2, so not too much hope for it to make the competition at the end of the season, and I think a 1-1 Paintrain would still need to pull off something special in its third fight. Smeeee, however, goes to 2-0, which, I mean, this could be a surprise, 31st or 32nd seed if it gets put up against a veteran bot in its third fight, which a 2-0 newcomer probably would have happen. At 1-1, it would obviously still have hope, but to be honest, neither of these robots are ones that I expect to shape the destiny of this season. Now let's get ready for the main event. We've had one Battle of the Undefeated previously this episode, but now we have two robots on 1-0. It's Sawblaze versus Uppercut. Both of these robots are coming off very impressive victories. I'd say Alex Satori and Uppercut were indeed more spectacular in their defeat of Gemini. However, it has to be said that Jamison Go had the higher quality opponent in Whiplash and the Vasquez family. It's not a robot that gets knocked out often, and Sawblaze managed to find a way to do that. They controlled the fight from the onset. They were able to bully the smaller Whiplash around the ring and finish it off with a critical strike to the top of the robot. Uppercut, on the other hand, they were able to just launch one of the Geminis right out of the ring and completely disable the other. It was 2 hits, 2 kills, and they were really able to display the improvements that they've made to their weapon this season. So there's a few fights from the history of Battlebots that we need to look at if we are to decipher who's going to win this match. First of all, we have to go back to Season 3, and one of the top 16 battles between Sawblaze and Monsoon. Monsoon is a very similar robot to Uppercut, or at least has a very similar weapon, and the geometry of how it sticks out from the robot. Sawblaze lost that fight, but only after a couple of driving errors. Jamison Go, I would say, has improved his driving since then, and even then during that match, he was dominating that fight for large portions of the battle. Monsoon didn't seem to have much of an answer until Sawblaze slipped up. Another fight that we need to look at is between Uppercut and Scorpios. Scorpios is famously a very similar robot to Sawblaze, although the front of the robot is definitely quite different. That's another case where the more control-based robot made a mistake, and the weapon of Uppercut managed to do some damage to the wheel of Scorpios, which set the tone for the rest of the fight, which Uppercut dominated a whole lot more than Monsoon was able to against Sawblaze. The last fight I want to look at is Uppercut versus Breakerbox. Now, Breakerbox was able to expose the weakness of Uppercut in that it definitely doesn't like getting pushed around the box by a wedge that its weapon can't get any purchase on. So finally, to this fight, Uppercut versus Sawblaze, I think we're going to see Jamison Go in control of the fight for large portions of time, and Uppercut is going to have to be patient and wait for those driving errors, which, as Jamison gets more and more experienced, are becoming less frequent. The thing is, however, that weapon on Uppercut is vicious this season. The spin-up time is incredibly fast, and any moment that Sawblaze is able to stop Uppercut's weapon against the wall, Uppercut's going to have that thing spinning right back up to a dangerous speed within only a couple of seconds, giving them more and more chances to do some proper damage. Sawblaze, I think, will go in with the hammer saw. I think they're going to need to do some damage of their own, even though it does make control a little bit more difficult than the thinner cutting blade. I don't think they're going to want to sacrifice the chance of knocking Uppercut out once they have it pinned against the wall or something like that. Alex Hattori, in the meantime, is going to have to be patient. He's not going to have the immediate opportunity like he did against Scorpios to impair the movement of Sawblaze and take control of the match from there, but I believe the opportunity will present itself eventually, and that faster spin-up time will allow him to take full advantage of that opportunity. Any hit they land on Sawblaze could be a knockout blow. That's the problem for Jamison in this fight. Any move could be his last, and I think that's why I have to give it to Uppercut. I don't necessarily think Sawblaze will be knocked out, but I think at some point Uppercut will do some serious damage to the weapon or the drive, or both, and while Sawblaze will take the control portion of the decision, the damage caused by Uppercut will probably tip it in their favor. Just real quick on the outlook for this season for both of these robots. Both of them are in a very similar position right now. The robot that ends up 2-0, I reckon, automatically gets into the top 32 no matter what happens in their next fight. The loser at 1-1 will probably still bounce back and win their next fight, and even if they don't, I'd say either of these robots at 1-2 at the end of the season have a chance of scraping in to the bottom part of the seeding ladder. These are two high quality robots that probably won't get left high and dry by the selection committee. Alright, so that is it for episode 6. Those were my previews and predictions. What a bunch of fights this is going to be. I thoroughly enjoyed delving into the past to try and figure out who's going to win in the future. So just to recap what my specific predictions are: Rotator by KO, Gigabyte by KO, Slapbox by judge's decision, Mad Catter by KO, Tantrum by KO, Smeeee by judge's decision, and Uppercut by judge's decision. So I will see you next time for episode 7 of Battlebots previews and predictions. Don't forget to hit some buttons on your way out. I always enjoy chatting with you guys, and I'll see you next time.